Welcome to the very first lecture in the section 2 of this course, Introduction to CSS. In this video, I will teach you the various methods to associate CSS styles with your HTML document. Before we get into the code, let me quickly create a new folder here within our working files directory. And I'm going to copy our project directory and I'll paste it in the CSS folder. Right here in my text editor, I'm going to click on Files, Open, and I'm going to locate the working directories. This is the working directories on my desktop. And then I'm going to refresh this. All right, I have chapter 2 here. I'm going to now be working within the chapter 2 CSS folder. Basically, there are 4 methods that we can use to include or associate CSS with our HTML document. The first one that I'll consider in this lecture is the internal or embedded method. We have seen this before in HTML section. It allows us to use the style element to include a style sheet in our HTML document. So all we need to do is to open and close the style element and then put our code in between the opening and closing style tag. Let's say we want to change the background color, so we can actually target this particular element. We know that in HTML, this is a tag which begins from right here. Okay, so we can target this tag and then say for this particular tag, we want to set the background color to Cora. And then we can go one step further to target all the paragraph in this document and say for the paragraph, we want to set the color to white. So this will essentially affect the text color of the paragraph. And then we want to set the background color for the paragraph. We want to set this to dark blue. Let's view this in the browser. So now we'll go to our CSS projects and then index. You can see right here that the background color for all paragraph elements is dark blue, while the text is white. You can also see that the background color of the body has changed. If we go over to the books page, you see that everything here remains the same. If we come again to the home page, you see that it has a different style in place now. This is a simple example of how we can use the internal or embedded method to attach style sheets to our HTML document. Next, we're going to see the inline method. Inline method basically means that we are using the style attribute of the specific HTML element to apply or define a CSS style rule for that element. The example that we have here uses the inline method to set the text align for the H1 tag to center and then also set the font size to 40. This is just a simple example of using the inline element, and pretty sure we have used this in the project that we created for the concluding part of the HTML series. The next one is the external style sheet. This method will basically allow you to use the link element to include styles from external files into HTML document. Let's quickly see how we can do this. First, we need to create the CSS file. And just so you know that when we are creating the file must have an extension of .css. In chapter 2 projects folder, I will right click and I'm going to say create a new file and I'm going to name this custom.css. So the extension name must be .css and then I'm going to save this. All right, I'll open the index.html and then here I can use link. This is the element that is required. Then we can specify the type. Say this is test/css and next we can specify the rel. Say this is style sheet. And finally, we specify the source of this document using the href attribute. So this is going to be the file that we want to add, the CSS file. Right now, we have created the link to this CSS file. If I go back to the browser again now and do a refresh, you can see that there is no style currently applied to all the pages. Okay, so let's go to the custom.css file. And now let us do the same thing again. Let's target the body. And this time, let's set the background color. Let's choose the same color, Cora. We can decide to target all the heading elements. So let's say H1 and then H2. So we want to target both H1 and H2, and then we want to set the color to dark blue. And then we use the text transform property. So we want to say, make it uppercase. All right. So because we've only added this link to the index page, it will only affect the presentation of the index page. Let's see this on the browser. You can see that the heading color is now dark blue and also in uppercase. So I'm going to change this to capitalize. All right. You can see that the CSS is being applied from the external style sheet. Okay, what you need to note here is that the external style sheet must have an extension of .css. And within this external style sheet, we cannot write HTML tag here like paragraph. You can see that my text editor is already marking this as incorrect because this is not allowed here. You cannot include HTML tag within the CSS file. And you also take note here that immediately after the specific element that we're targeting, we have the opening curly brace and then we have the closing curly brace. And then we can now begin to specify the attribute for this particular element that we want to change the presentation. And the last method that I want to show you is how to use the import method to add CSS to our HTML document. Normally, we will use the import within the plain CSS file, but we can also use it directly in the HTML document. In subsequent lecture, I'm going to show you how we can use the import directly here, but for the purpose of this illustration and what I want to show is how to directly add it to the HTML document. So we can use the style element in between the opening and closing style tag. Then we can use the @import, and I'm going to import the custom.css file. All right, I'm going to get rid of this style. Save and then refresh. You see that the page is going to remain the same. Nothing changes. This is because we've actually imported the exact same file into the document, just that we are using the import method instead of the link method. Let me get rid of this. When adding styles to HTML document, it is important to understand the order of precedence or the rule of overriding. I'm going to quickly illustrate this to you from what we already have here. You can see that here we have a background color for the main container div, and I set this to Alice Blue. I'm going to change this to red. And right here you can see that this div has a red color and the body has the Cora color. So let me remove this completely and save and then refresh the page. You can see now that everything except this div has the same color with the body. Previously, it was still red because we were using the inline CSS style here to add the color. What this means basically is that any style that is defined as inline, we override the same behavior that is defined in an external CSS file or using the internal CSS style. So let's quickly see another example. You can see here that this paragraph is aligned to the center using the inline CSS style. I am going to now come to custom.css and target all the paragraph and then say text align. We want to align the text to the right. Let me quickly refresh this on the browser. Right here, you can see that this particular text was actually aligned to the right hand side. This text stays the same. The image stays the same. Let's go over to our code again. Let me illustrate that for you. Okay, so let me now remove this style. Save it. And let's refresh the browser. And you can see that both the image and this text has been moved to the right hand side of the page. So if I return the style back and save, refresh the page, you see that it moves back to the center of the page, showing us that the inline CSS style has a higher precedence over any other CSS style. So whatever style that is defined using the inline CSS style method will have a higher precedence over any other method that you're using. When it comes to internal and external style, the one that is added last in the HTML head section, we override the first one. So for instance, if I come here and create a style element, and within the style element, I target the body and set the background color to dark green. You take note that I am adding the style element after the link element. All right, let's refresh the browser. you can see that the style element, which is the internal or embedded style method, overrides the external CSS file that we have here. So if I take this now and bring it below here and refresh the page, you can see that it returns back to using the CSS rule defined in the external document. This is basically how style overriding works in CSS. You just take note, it's very simple. The inline style will always take precedence, and then for the internal and external CSS, it depends on the one that you have added last. The one that you have added last will have a higher precedence over the one that you have added first.